to today. I'm just going to start introducing a little bit about Zoom. I have spotlighted Henrik, the speaker for today, and then also us in the CRISP crew. So if you hover on top, like on your top right in your window, you can pick what you want to see, because sometimes you really do want to see all the participants as well. So if you want to see everyone, or as many as possible, you should pick the gallery view. But if you only want to view the speaker and whatever Henrik is sharing today, you should choose the speaker view. But I'm guessing that everyone is quite familiar with the Zoom meetings now. If you want to, you can start like typing something in the chat so we see that that is working as well. Maybe you can share where you're sitting. Wow. So fast, I can't even see.
Yeah.
Norway,
America,
oh India,
India.
Welcome.
Mm.
Oh my God. What's the time in India? That's interesting.
Canada, let's see.
Oh, hi, Christina, Kiki.
Oh, I thought it said Venezuela, but it was Vallentuna.
Well, same.
Close
right?
enough.
Close enough. Oh, so excited to see so many people here. I'm guessing that a lot of people are gonna come in when we are starting, but let's start at least. Thomas, do you want to start sharing the slides? A lot of people from Stockholm, I think. Oh, Seattle, good morning. Good morning to you. All right. Yes, so welcome to today's session. We are super excited to start off the Leading Complexity program, and so excited to see everyone like this as well. This is the crew. It's Michael Göte, Thomas Björkholm, Marcus Kassenfors, and me, Jenny Mortensen. Wave to the public, hello. There's the story about how this all started, and I think that you, Thomas, can explain that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually started already 2.5 years ago. We had David Marquet visiting Stockholm, holding a class, and just before we were chit-chatting and we were talking about the need of having the leaders understand that leading in complexity is not about finding some shortcut, some simple solution to just make it look good. Instead, it was a new way of viewing the world. And by that, we also needed a completely new operating system. Being humble enough, we understood that he and we were just seeing parts of the world. So we needed to bring some other people in and have their views as well. So we started to ask a couple of people to join, and then COVID came. So everything was halted for a couple of years. But last year, some of my fantastic and awesome colleagues, they said that maybe we should do something about those ideas, collecting a lot of really good thought leaders around the world, the best we could think of, and put them in one program together, and helping people to, by listening to those very inspiring people, getting a better understanding of what it is to lead in complexity, and at the same time getting a lot of different views. So for me, it's very exciting to be here. It's been a long journey, especially the last year, been a lot of work just to have everything set up. And I'm very excited, and I just hope that it will be just as good as we always have been hoping it will be. So that's the reason why we are here. And this is the result of almost 2.5 years of work.
Thank
Over
you
to
so
you,
much.
Jenny.
Yeah, I'm like passing the ball over to Michael right away because we have some practice. Yeah, exactly. So please let us know what's going on
Yes.
with all the emails.
Yes. So thanks. So first of all, after each session, we will share the videos. So as soon as they are rendered and ready, so to say, we will share them. We will also share any material that the presenter has, so slides and things like that they want to share. Also, would like to encourage you to join our Slack channel, so there we can have continuous discussion after the events and continue talking about what's upcoming. And we have also a calendar that you can subscribe to. So that is also in our communication. You will get information on how to subscribe to the calendar, so you get it automatically in your own calendar. And after the event, we will also send out links for next session when we get a little closer to next session. So I think that are the most important practicalities. So yeah, make sure that you get the information mailed from us, and if you have any questions and so on, just send us an email and we'll try to fix it.
Thank you, Michael. So, Marcus, who will be in this program? Who are the speakers?
Yes, we have a jam-packed program with 13 sessions. And next up is Joe Justice, so next week. But check the time. It's at 7 p.m. European time, Central European time. So it's because of Joe living in Hawaii. So we wanted to give him a favor that he doesn't have to wake up in the wee morning. So yeah, 7 p.m. next week. Next Thursday. So stay tuned. We're going to send more information by email. And then you can see, I mean, you see the schedule on the website, leadingcomplexity.com. We have a fantastic lineup of thought leaders every week until the holidays. So yeah, lots of learning. And just in addition to Thomas's intro, I think one of the things that we thought about bringing together these thought leaders is what would happen? Like, what would happen if we bring these people together and to share their different points of view on how to lead in complexity? And it's up to you, the participant, to form your own opinions. And like Michael talked about, or Thomas talked about, the shortcuts that we see in the corporate world in terms of leadership and management across the world, that people tend to focus on shortcuts, but that's not the answer, right? It's about really digging deep into what leading in complexity means. So yeah, that's a bit about the schedule.
Words, I would say. Okay. Should we continue to the topic of today? And today we will meet Henrik Kniberg, and he's been around for quite a while in the Agile community. And he's very famous for the Spotify videos and the video about PO in a nutshell. He is also very famous for the 3 books that he has been writing. It's Scrum and XP from the trenches, it's Lean from the trenches, and Kanban and Scrum, making the most of both. Well, handing over to you, Henrik.
All right, thank you very much. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And before launching into the topic at hand, you're seeing my screen here, right? A bunch of nice faces here. Yeah, seeing this lineup, which by the way is amazing. Like Thomas and everyone involved, like I'm really impressed by getting this is cat herding. These are busy people. Getting everyone together to do this thing is really cool. But it reminds me of the first Agile conference that I attended in the past. When I wrote my first book, I didn't know that there was such a thing as a conference. I was completely out of the loop, and suddenly people started contacting me and say, "Hey, can you come and speak?" And I was like, okay. And I came to a conference, and there was a bunch of people like this. like kind of thought leaders, people who had written the books that I'd been reading and gotten all inspired by. And I was like, kind of, you know, starstruck and blown away. You know, there they are. They're humans. They're people, and now they're talking. Like, that's cool. And I kind of wrote down everything they said, kind of like as if it was gospel coming from a god. But then I was to the next person, and the next person, and I was like, wait a sec. These different experts, they're saying things, but sometimes they're saying things that conflict with each other. So they can't both be right. Oh my God, I need to think for myself also. So that was kind of my big takeaway, was listen to these inspiring people, but then take everything with a grain of salt, because everyone is you know, biased by whatever their experience happens to be, which might not match your context. So listen to all these inspiring people, and then of course think for yourself. There's no absolute truths coming from anybody, I would say. But yeah, just a little reflection when I saw this. So I'm going to be talking about, by the way, this is my presentation. There are no fancy slides and stuff. I'll just be talking over this Miro board. But you can join the board. So let me actually send a link. So copy board link. I'll post it in the chat if I can find the link to the chat. Where the heck is the link to the chat? Zoom chat. There it is. Okay. Link to the board. There. This is an editable link. Please use it with respect. But the reason why I made it editable is because down here I have two boxes where you are very welcome to put notes as we go. So it could be things that pop into your head as insights, or things that are questions that we maybe will get around to addressing a few of them. But I also posted a link just so that, you know, if you get tired of me scrolling around all the time, you can get your own version of the board and kind of in peace and quiet look at what I'm showing. But okay. Oh, the link didn't get... Okay, I'll put it in Slack as well. Maybe Zoom filters links. So link to my board. There. All right. Hopefully that should do it. But even if you can't access the board, it's no problem. I will be screen sharing through the whole thing, and you'll receive a PDF afterwards. Anyway, context here. There's this thing called this that the world calls the Spotify model. And big fat disclaimer: this talk is not about Spotify. It might sound like it, but it's not. I don't work at Spotify. I haven't been there for 5 years. I do stay in touch with some people working there, but I'm not in any way trying to talk about how Spotify works. I'm talking about this model itself, which is kind of interesting. What is it, first of all? Well, you've received an email with some links. Maybe you had a chance to look at the video. Maybe you've seen them in the past. I don't know. But basically, there are two videos out there called Spotify Engineering Culture. You can Google it and find it easily. Part 1 is basically me drawing this big picture over 15 minutes. Part 2 is me drawing this big picture over 15 minutes. Then there's also an article from 2012 where me and Anders Ivarsson, that's the former Spotify colleague, wrote an article. These things, this is it. That's all really there is in the sense of what people call a Spotify model. We put this out there as just sharing some thoughts and some insights from what we were doing at Spotify. And then kind of the world went bananas, and this became like a hyped religion almost to some extent. And you know, it got labeled the Spotify model. But to be clear, it was never my intent really, or anyone else's intent to create a model. And that's quite interesting on its own, right? It tells you something about how models sometimes get created. And this is the theme of the talk. We're going to talk through the story of how the Spotify model became a thing and what happened as a result of it outside of Spotify. And let me lock this thing so people don't accidentally drag it around. There. And maybe with your help, because I don't have any nicely packaged insights out of it. I have a few thoughts, but I think, you know, you're a bunch of smart people. So maybe we can help kind of collect what can we learn from this rather weird thing that happened with the Spotify model. And yeah, maybe we can have some conversations around it. So I put up some kind of guiding questions that I'm going to use now, just kind of in my talk. So this talk is more like a talk with a small t, not a talk with a big t, because it's not a prepared fancy thing. But anyway, yeah. So what is the Spotify model? Why are we talking about it? Well, basically because it has made a big impact on the world of organizational change, and that's kind of interesting, especially considering that it wasn't deliberate. That's why we're talking about it. But okay, so just out of curiosity, if anyone's on the board, just put a sticky note here so I can see that you can edit stuff. Just put a smiley or something down here. Just curious. Yeah. All right. Cool. It's working. Great. Nice. So yeah, how did the model become a thing? I want to talk about this because I haven't published it anywhere. I think this story behind, and I don't know. Sometimes it's interesting to hear how things happen. So let's rewind a bit. And up here in the corner, I found a timeline that someone made over Spotify's history. Found it there in 2006. And then, yeah, the timeline continues, of course. Or more like it ends here, but now we're in 2022. But anyway, quick rewind. My first contact with Spotify was accidental. I was doing a talk at KTH, a university here in Stockholm. And on a yearly basis, typically I do an Agile talk to a bunch of last year students, kind of to inspire them a little bit about Agile, especially since I know that it's waterfall is still being taught to some extent in schools, which is a bit scary. But anyway, I did this talk, and the audience wasn't super enthusiastic. So in my mind, it wasn't a great talk. It was like an okay talk. But there was a small group of people that were super enthusiastic, and they came up after the talk, and they were almost aggressively throwing questions at me. Like, but wait a sec, what about sprint planning with multiple teams? What about this? What about that? They were very specific questions. And I just had a few minutes, so I talked to them a little bit, and then I had to go. And then I kind of didn't think about that anymore until maybe a year later. I think now, maybe my talk was somewhere around here. And I was invited to come meet this Swedish startup called Spotify. And I knew about their product, but it was very new. And it turned out that they were trying to apply Scrum, and they had been growing, so they now had multiple teams, and they had questions about how do we deal with multiple teams. So I just came in and did a few workshops, kind of like retrospectives with teams. This must have been somewhere around, maybe it was around here, I don't remember exactly, but just around the launch. And what I saw was pretty interesting, because I'd worked as a kind of a, I stumbled into Agile like many of us, and then I've spent a bunch of time helping companies apply Agile thinking and doing like what we call transformations. So I was used to companies going from not Agile to Agile. But when I came into Spotify, I was struck by that this company seems to be like native Agile. There wasn't a transformation that needed to happen. It was more like they are applying Scrum all the way through. And they, of course, want to improve it in tons of ways, but it was just an interesting, different kind of situation. So I talked about that. I'm like, hey, this is interesting. You guys seem to be like, all in on Scrum. And then to my surprise, they're like, yeah, but we attended your talk. Don't you remember? We had all these questions. And I'm like, what? That was you? Oh, this is so cool. So that talk that I thought was kind of like a meh talk that didn't do much impact, it was apparently the perfectly timed talk for this little Swedish startup that were just at the position where they're like, how are we going to work? We don't want to use waterfall, but we need some other way of working. And it turned out that Scrum, showing Scrum as an approach was perfect timed there at KTH. So they kind of grabbed it, and then they kind of tried to make it part of their culture. So that was really cool to hear. But my involvement was very limited, other than planting those seeds of inspiration in the beginning. So I was there for a little bit, and then on and off for a few years, just short visits to follow up and kind of offer some coaching. But then at some point I got sucked in, because it started getting really interesting. The company was growing fast and stuff was happening, and I was kind of fascinated. So I got sucked in and worked not quite full time, but close, for like almost, I guess, 5 years or something during I guess it was probably here-ish. Oh, that was a big pen there. But let's say around here was my most active time, or maybe there, right? Most active. Here was just spotty involvement. And when I came in, Spotify had, when I came in and started working more focused on this company, they had just started hiring coaches. So, and some of the first ones were actually, I think, probably here now. Like Joaquin, for example, my colleague at Crisp was one of the early ones who got hired in. And several other Crisp colleagues, such as Thomas, got sucked in later. So a lot of us have been sucked into this very interesting case. But, oh yeah, thanks for making my line thinner. This is great. I got all these assistants helping with my board. But anyway, this growing group of coaches was essentially, in my mind, culture workers. And I was part of this gang as well. So we were the Agile coaches, and it was a growing group, and we worked a lot with both teams and managers around how can we work effectively with Agile, because the company was doubling in size every year, literally. And when that happens, everything breaks all the time. You can have a great process and it just breaks the next year because we're twice as many people. So things are breaking all the time. We're always trying to catch up with process. And the leaders, especially the CTO at the time, was very kind of visionary in terms of how we want to work. He talked a lot about autonomy and a lot about the importance of teams being able to make decisions quickly and iterate quickly. All these agile things were kind of like obvious to him, and he helped make this part of the culture. And then as agile coaches, we helped spread this, but also make it work in practice. So it's very much a collaboration with teams, coaches, and managers. But what happened over those years was something really interesting. This got shaped into what I consider to be an agile native culture. And it was the first time I've seen that personally. I'd read about it in other companies, but it was the first time I could kind of see it and breathe it on a day-to-day basis. And I was pretty fascinated. And many people around me had the same feeling of like, this is special. This culture is special. For example, I would see things like Team A is having trouble because they're blocked by something Team B is using. Most other companies, what would happen is complaining. Team A would sit and complain that Team B is so slow. And they would maybe go work on something else or something. Or maybe there'd be a meeting about it a month later. But here, people consider it obvious that, hey, let's just go talk to each other and figure it out and then get back to work. So no need to go through formal, lines of communication. It's just have a problem, get the people involved together, talk about it, solve it, move on. And if it's a recurring problem, let's do a retro and improve it. So all these things that I've kind of had to try to, coach into different organizations, it was already here and considered obvious. So that was kind of interesting. There were tons of problems, of course, because it was a fast-growing startup trying to reinvent this, turn this very conservative industry, the music industry, upside down and kind of change everything about it. So it was a huge challenge, and there was a lot of stuff to fix all the time, and that's why me and the other coaches and basically everybody had our hands full just trying to make things work. But anyway, over time, these kind of principles started crystallizing more and more, such as the principle of these autonomous teams, which, by the way, is really just Scrum, right? But what I think is nice is that there we managed to decouple the principles from Scrum itself, and saying that you don't have to do Scrum to have autonomous teams. Some teams were doing Kanban, and we want autonomous teams there too. So decoupling the principles from the actual methods was quite useful. But anyway, this whole thing it's like this very popular picture with our kind of matrix thing, tribes, squads, chapters, and guilds. This kind of was really the CTO who had this idea that we need to create a structure to grow into. So quite early in the process, this must have been maybe, I don't know, 2011 or something. He kind of talked about this, and again, we as coaches tried to help make it work in practice. It was premature, and this is another insight. The model was created before it was needed, and in most other companies, I would have pushed back against that and said, let's not create a structure that's not needed right now. But actually, it was the right decision, I think. We created tribes before we needed tribes. And that meant that by the time we were enough people that we needed to have a split squads into tribes, then we had that structure kind of already in place. So that I found to be kind of like a good leadership, basically. It's a slippery slope, because if you go too far with that, you'll create lots of bureaucracy before it's needed, and then you kind of get stuck. But anyway, it was interesting. As we were growing quickly, people would come in, new people, and me and the other coaches would typically be trying to explain, as new people come in, try to explain how we're trying to work. What are these funny words, right? What is a tribe? And by the way, these funny words, that was kind of deliberate, because by calling things weird words, instead of department or team, it's tribe and squad. Instead of community of interest, it's chapter or guild. It's weird words. Kind of deliberate, because that forces people to ask, wait a sec, what the heck is a tribe? And that's good, because then you don't bring preconceived notions, and then we have to actually define what we mean by it. Of course, the definition was never exact. It changed over time, but it was useful to always be talking about what do we mean by this, and also allowed us to not automatically use old established practices from the past, because a lot of those old established practices came from a world that was less complex. That, by the way, is why the connection between this topic and leading complexity is really that I found this whole approach is really about complexity, because Spotify was a company, and still is a company, that is completely disrupting the music industry. And the only, at least at the time, the only competitive advantage Spotify had was speed of innovation. And this was repeated over and over again from management, that it's all we got. We don't have money compared to other companies. We don't have people. We don't have, like Apple and Google own the platforms, right? All competitors had more money, more people, more everything than we had. The only thing we had was speed of innovation. And that's why we really tried to make the most of that. And almost everything in this model is about enabling teams to move fast and iterate fast and experiment fast. So, and that's really a strategy to deal with a complex world. And I think that's one of the reasons why Spotify managed to kind of revolutionize this extremely conservative industry and kind of outcompete these other much stronger companies. But anyway, again, this talk is not so much about Spotify, it's more about the model. So how did this model become a thing? Well, anyway, at some point, a lot of us were like, this is interesting. There's interesting stuff happening here. But a lot of the stuff we're doing here at Spotify isn't ours. Like we look around and we steal ideas from everywhere. Right? We look at Google, we look at like Netflix, all these other companies that had interesting case studies. We would basically look out there and take stuff that made sense and put it in our context and of course adapt it. And so a lot of this stuff isn't really specific to Spotify at all. So we felt this kind of like urge to give back. Like maybe we can share back what we're doing. So of course everyone's busy all the time, but finally me and a colleague Anders like decided to actually take the time to write an article. So it became this 14-page article just describing like, not pitching it as a model again, just saying, hey, here's what we've been up to and here's what we've been learning and we think it's interesting kind of thing. Fun fact, I browsed this document now, it's from 2012, it's 10 years old, right? So I had to kind of browse it just quickly. And what's interesting is this is on the first page. Right there on the first page, disclaimer, we didn't invent this model. Spotify is, like any good agile company, evolving fast. This article is only a snapshot of our current way of working. Ta-da, snapshot. It's a journey in progress, not a journey completed. By the time you read this, things have already changed. Yeah, this was already in 2012. And I think this is one of the key aspects of the Spotify approach that people miss. They look at this and say, oh, this is the Spotify model. We want to do this. Or people say, wait, Spotify does not do all this anymore. Therefore, the model didn't work. No, it's actually the opposite. If Spotify was doing all these things already, then the model didn't work. And then we're stuck. So this really was a snapshot. Talking to colleagues now, or people who currently work at Spotify, what I'm hearing is kind of like I expected. Some of these things are still in place, some are not. And it also varies a lot from different parts in the organization. In fact, the company's so big now, so nobody really knows because it depends on who you ask, right? But again, let's talk about the model itself, not so much about the company. So me and Anders put out this article, and we were really surprised by the impact this had. I mean, I've written stuff before, but this was different. This caused a splash on a whole other magnitude, which made me wonder why. Like, why does this one? I mean, of course, I was fascinated by the culture, but I didn't realize that so many other people would be equally or even more fascinated by it. That was confirmed even further when I went to Paris in 2013 to do a keynote at a conference. And then I basically talked about this, basically said, okay, here's what we've been doing, here's what we're learning. I was a bit nervous because there were Spotify colleagues in the audience. And it's always scary talking about a company when you have colleagues in the audience. You're like, am I going to say something stupid now? So afterwards I asked him so what did you think? But to my, positive surprise, they said, this was completely spot on. This is great. You really nailed the description of how we work. So that made me feel comfortable that I wasn't just, making stuff up. But anyway, coming back to Spotify, we grew a lot, and I noticed that I was spending more and more time, since I had this material, I had these very kind of clear descriptions of the way we work and the way we're trying to work. Then I often ended up in workshops with new people trying to describe, basically repeating this talk over and over. So it started getting a bit old. And some people, I think some of the managers were like, hey, Henrik, maybe you should consider just making a video out of this presentation. Oh, wait, is that me? Or is someone not muted? Oh, anyway, so I did. So I made a video. I basically took my Agile Product Ownership in a Nutshell video, which is me drawing and talking. And I'm like, well, that was a good format. That was a good way to convey something. So I basically did the same thing again. Although now it took a lot longer time because every single detail here I had to confirm with my colleagues. Everything, just check, is this correct? Does this make sense? So as I mentioned in the video, this is a mixture, or was, I guess, a mixture of how we actually worked and how we were trying to work. But it varied from part to part. So if I asked people afterwards, like, to what extent is this an accurate description of your work? Then they would be like, well, typically they'd be like, well, about 80% is spot on. This is exactly how we work, and it makes sense. About 20% is like, I'm not so sure about that. And about 10% is just, or 5%, whatever, is just bullshit. That's nowhere near how we work right now. But that 5 to 10% of bullshit was different for different teams. So it was quite interesting. So as I followed up on this, my conclusion was that at the time, 2014, This was essentially a description of how most teams worked most of the time, sort of. But also largely aspirational. As in, almost everyone I talked to said, this is how we want to work, this is how we're trying to work. But not everyone was actually doing all these things. But anyway, so I made the video and put it out there again in the naive hope that maybe I could spend less time doing this talk, because now I have a video. Well, no, that backfired, because then I got even more showered with requests to come and do talks about the Spotify model. I'm like, but I just made a video. But no, they wanted the actual, talk. So I did it quite a lot until I started basically not doing them. Just saying, hey, listen, I don't want to repeat this talk over and over. Just watch the video. And then if you have questions, we can talk about that. Anyway, this was basically the birth of the model. And it wasn't just me. Other people were putting out talks and case studies. It's just that this one happened to kind of generate the most attention, maybe because it was this very colorful video with drawing, and people tend to get, intrigued by that. So, okay, so that's how the model became a thing. Interestingly enough, during that whole time, the people like outside Spotify, like people were kind of going bananas. Like I put some examples up here. It's hilarious. This is actually even fairly fresh, 2021. You look at these are big surveys of how people are applying Agile. Which framework does the organization follow to help scale Agile? And Spotify is up here on 4th place as a framework. Here it's 3rd place in enterprise Agile framework adoption. And it says here that out of all the companies in that survey, 25% of them were actually already implementing or considering implementing the Spotify model. It's funny, right? Because behind almost all these other things, there are organizations of people hired, there are marketing departments, there are training crews, there's all this big engine trying to push out the framework. And here we have this thing which was just a video, an article, which just took a life on its own. Really interesting. There are some insights to be gained from that. I'm not sure exactly what, but it's interesting. There was even a movie made about it, like a movie called Squads. You can find it here. A really professionally made movie where they interviewed a bunch of people, including me and some colleagues, talking about the phenomenon. This was not about Spotify so much about what happened as a result of this model spreading. Companies getting inspired, right? ING Bank apparently ranked the best bank in the world 2017. I don't know why exactly. I don't know what that means, but apparently a successful bank around that same period, they went kind of all in on applying, basically taking the Spotify approach and putting their own spin on it, which I think is the right approach. But the good thing for them, they didn't just read the article and make assumptions. They came to Spotify, talked to us, and they came back and they, made a proper implementation of something that would fit them. So, but greatly inspired by Spotify. They use the same words with squads and tribes, but they're also inspired by other companies. I put some links here with some case studies about it. But yeah, just interesting, how did this model suddenly cause all this change? And there's a general insight. I worked kind of like a change agent, right? I was at Spotify trying to help them improve, but so were a bunch of other people. I was at other companies driving change. I was teaching courses trying to inspire people to change. But yet this video and this article caused more change than anything else I've done in my whole career. So spending, deliberate hours, hundreds of hours at a company trying to help them get from A to B, a lot of work for limited impact at one company. And then here, putting out a video and an article, and then hundreds, if not more, companies changed. Completely out of my control. So it's just, there's something in there about complexity, right? Maybe there are better, more effective ways to cause change than to be the person trying to drive it. Maybe it's about planting seeds. Maybe it's about inspiring people and letting go of control and letting self-selection come in. The people who want to change are the ones who are going to do it anyway. And then maybe your work can be very small, just helping them, get over the tipping point, and then bang, stuff happens. But yeah, as I mentioned, feel free to add any insights of your own. I'm not writing down my insights right now because I want to focus on talking, but I'll kind of share some insights as we go. But that's one insight, that planting seeds is maybe the most effective way of causing change rather than actually driving change. Okay, so how did the model become a thing? Yeah, talked about that. So is it real? I talked a bit about that already. Does Spotify really work like this 2014? Mostly yes, but of course not entirely. And also mostly within product development, not the company as a whole. It was mostly within product development that this stuff was happening. Does Spotify work like this now? I don't know. I don't work there. But again, the people I talk to who do work there say that it varies. So this is not really something I feel equipped to talk so much about. If there's someone else here now who works at Spotify, which I'm pretty sure there is, feel free to share anything, maybe at the end or add notes. But interestingly enough, it doesn't matter. Whether the answer is yes, no, or a little bit or a lot, it doesn't really matter at all, because the model is now its own thing, independent of Spotify. And I think that's quite interesting. Which brings me to the next question. Is it really a model? And the very short answer is yes. It is most definitely a model. Just Google what the word model means, right? You'll find, when I did that, I found model, a thing used as an example to follow or imitate. Yeah, people follow or imitate it. It's a model. It doesn't matter whether it was intended to be one or not, which it wasn't. I can pick up a toaster and I can use it as a model for something, right? Now it's a model. It became a model because I use it as a model. It doesn't matter what the toaster manufacturer was intending. So yeah, because the reason I bring this up is because I've seen a few articles from, like, for example, former Spotify employees saying that there's no such thing as a Spotify model. And just in terms of that title, I would say they're wrong. But their point is valid. What they're basically saying is typically that there's no such thing as the Spotify model in Spotify. And that's actually a funny thing, because that's actually true. Because when I came back from this talk in Paris, everyone was raving about the Spotify model outside of Spotify, but not inside Spotify. People inside Spotify, they were just doing their work, continuing improving stuff and, working along. And then they would sometimes hear all the talking outside, and they'd be like, what? Someone asked me literally, Henrik, people are talking about something called the Spotify model. What's that? And I'd be like, well, that's what people are calling the way we work. Like, what? That's interesting. So it turned out that, yeah, inside Spotify, it was never really a thing. It was just continuous improvement of the way we work. And using some terminology like tribes and guilds. But outside, it kind of became a model. So yes, that's kind of interesting. But anyway, yeah. So definitely, yes, it's a model outside, but internally in the company, I don't know. Unless it's become a model later, then I would say it's probably not really a model. It's more like a snapshot of a point in time. Okay, next question. Is it any good? Does it work? Is it a silver bullet? Well, you already know the answer to that. There's no silver bullets. There's this interesting thing, though. It seems like human nature seems to be that we like to simplify things down to either it worked and it's awesome, or it didn't work and it sucks. But that's not really, how it works, right? Was the model a silver bullet that makes everything great? No. But did it fail? No, definitely not. What I saw when I was there, and what everyone was kind of reflecting on there, was that this way of working is helping us a lot. In fact, I don't think Spotify would have succeeded without an approach like this. Because again, we were competing against companies that were so much stronger than us. Our only edge was moving faster. And this whole approach was optimized for moving fast. So I think the model was at the time crucial for the success of the company. But not all the details in the model. It's not like everything here was really important. But the concept, and I'll get back to that later about what are the core concepts. The concept of empowering these teams to be able to make decisions without waiting for management approval. Things like that, for example. Or the notion of releasing very often and getting feedback. Things that are might be considered obvious in an agile space, but at scale, it was quite rare at the time. It's a little more common now, but at the time, it was rare to see these agile ideas applied kind of in a larger context. So does the model work? It did work then and there. Does it work now? Well, this is interesting because I guess that's a little later about copying the model, but I've seen a lot of companies that try to copy the approach. And I've met a lot of those companies, and ING Bank is one example. And what I found is that, I haven't seen any company that got in trouble because of it. I've seen a few that ended up in a better position. I haven't seen any company that did everything here and just copied the model. It just doesn't make sense. I don't think it's even possible to just completely copy from one company to somewhere else. What they're doing is they're taking these terms and applying it in their context. So maybe they use the term squad and they use the word tribe, but it doesn't mean exactly the same thing. And this is where sometimes, again, sometimes people would scorn that and say, ha ha, you guys, you know, dumbasses, right? You, you copied the model, but you misunderstood it. Now you're doing it all wrong. But I would turn that around and say, no, wait a sec. They're doing the right thing. If they copied the model exactly and didn't change it, that's when they're doing the wrong thing. So I'm happy to see when people take the terms and misunderstand them. No, they're making it fit their context. So that's good. So kind of, I've seen companies greatly improve the way they work when they did this. I've seen companies mildly improve the way they work. And I've seen companies that just renamed things and nothing happened. So they're like, hey team, you're a squad now. And they're like, okay. And then they go back to working the way they normally work, right? And that's kind of silly, but it's also kind of harmless. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that copying this model or copying any model is fine. It's even good. We copied a ton of stuff when we you know, when we were doing these things. We copied from others. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if some of the speakers coming up after me invented several of the things inside here without me even knowing it, right? So yeah, copy is fine. I would say in general, the model can work. It can be useful. It often is useful. Not so much because of what's in the model, but because this model often inspires people to change. And that itself is often useful. So typically what I find is that, I'm skipping around a little bit here, but I'm going to skip over to this picture here. Like on the question of why is it so popular? Why are so many companies trying to follow this? This is a mashup of the Stacy matrix and the Kniberg model, by the way. I know that, yeah, not everyone likes when you mash up models, but what the heck. What's his name? I forgot his name. There he is. Yeah, Dave Snowden. He's the Kniberg guy. He saw me show this picture at a course and kind of gave me a hard time for it, which was funny. But anyway, regardless of where it came from, this is basically, okay, to what extent do we know what our customers want, right? That's kind of up here. We have no idea and it keeps changing versus it's crystal clear, right? And over here is to what extent do we know how to deliver what the customers want? And we know exactly how to deliver it, or versus we have no idea, right? And of course, you know, mashing in the Kniberg model here, this is complex, right? We don't know exactly what to build or how to build it, but we still got to do it. And this is like pretty much any startup nowadays, right? The thing is, Spotify model is optimized for this. And in fact, Agile is optimized for this. And the world is moving this way, right? Internet happened. Things are more connected. Technology is developing faster and faster. So the world is so much more interconnected now, and things that happen in one country could impact another country within seconds, right? Everyone is kind of competing with everyone because there's really no local markets anymore. It just, stuff is so global, it's so interconnected, so fast moving that, yeah, we're moving in this direction, which means that models like this, which are optimized for complexity, become more relevant and they become appealing and inspiring. So I think what's been happening is companies that are kind of panicking, and I've met some companies like that myself, especially banks that are like panicking because they're like, oh my God, we used to think that we're going to exist forever because we're a big bank, but now we realize that we might disappear in a few years because we're going irrelevant like dinosaurs because these smaller companies are stealing our cake and doing what we do, but better and faster. When they panic, they need to do something, but they're stuck in their old structures, and it's really hard to change an old structure. But if you see something else inspiring, it could give you hope and say, there are other ways of working. This isn't the only way. And then that could trigger a change. So I think this is, by the way, I'm just speculating here, by the way. None of this is fact. I'm just rambling and speculating, right? So I'm also happy to hear your speculations. But my speculation that is because so many companies have been forced and pulled unwillingly into this world of complexity, they have to change or they risk disappearing. And then they needed some inspiration, and this just happened to come along at the right time and packaged in a way that, 15-minute video, that's an attention span that most people have. It's okay. It's not a 2-hour detailed presentation. So, even a higher level manager might watch it and then go, hey, there's inspiring stuff in here. And it's also a real company, and it's a company that's doing really well. So maybe some of this might work here. So another example of that is Lego. I worked at Lego after Spotify for a few years, and Lego was one of those big companies that got inspired by this, and that's why I ended up there. They're like, and they told me literally, the managers at Lego said, we are good at waterfall. We're good at waterfall development. It's an old company, and they're doing amazingly well. And what they said was that we're good at waterfall, but that's not helping us anymore. because being good at waterfall doesn't help when you're in a complex world. It works when you're more in a world that's down here. So because waterfall is a predictive process. So even though we're doing really good as a company and we've kind of, you know, oiled our waterfall process to a well-functioning machine over many years, we can't rely on it anymore. We need another way of working. And to their credit, they didn't just say, let's do the Spotify model. They were more like, let's revisit our way of working. And I ended up there not because I was supposed to implement the model. It's just because I had experience in doing these kinds of things. So yeah, this is the message that I keep hearing, that, you know, especially big companies, where they're basically saying that we need to change. We don't have a choice anymore, and we need examples. And this example happened to come along. And I think the key insight there is, that's good. Use examples, spread examples, share your own examples, put them out there. But make them short and sweet, like not like 100-page white papers. You know, make it visual. If you need help, then get someone to help you, you know, make the message short and clear, because that's going to cause a lot of change. And also vice versa, if you're on the other end, if you're inside that big company and you want to make a change, don't be afraid to go out and look at other companies and their case studies and just shamelessly steal things from them. But again, just make it your own. Don't be like, we are now using the Spotify model. It's more like, we're changing the way we work. We're gonna be more, you know, we're gonna be a company that thrives under complexity, and we are learning from other companies that are ahead of us on that front, and then look at some of those companies and you know, steal some of the ideas. All right, so let's see, where are we on time? 17:46. We got some questions coming up. Cool. I think we will have time to address them. We have some insights coming up. Let's take a look at that quickly. Good, someone caught that for me. Thank you. Spotify model is more like liberating structures. What does that mean? Anyone? I've heard the term. I don't remember exactly what it means.
There is a framework or liberated structures with 34 practices that are an alternative to collaborating in a traditional way.
All right. Oh, okay. So then here's a wish, by the way. Whenever we put up any words here that might not be well known, please also add a link somewhere for people to learn more what it is. In general, whenever a note comes up here, that would be really useful. But cool. Yeah. Thanks for that. So everyone had more. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mentioned that as well. So yeah, feel free to add any of your own insights here as well. We'll get to the questions in a moment. I'll just get through the ones I already had pre-planned here. So we talked about, does it work? Is it any good? Why is it popular? Again, this is just me speculating. Oh yeah, I'll add one more thing about why it's popular. And again, this is just my speculation. For a period, I was very interested in change frameworks. So I read a lot of books about organizational change, and also read up on lean and things like Toyota Kata, and looking at different frameworks. And I kind of boiled it down to a bastardized, simplified summary. Because I noticed that a lot of these frameworks for organizational change and even personal change, they're kind of saying the same thing. So I extracted the common denominator and summarized it in this. And I'll get to the connection to Spotify model in a moment. But basically, the way I think of it is as, if you want change to happen, people need to know what's the point. Like, what is a destination? I need an appealing, inspiring picture. It could be the Agile Manifesto or something else that paints a picture of, we want to be there. Maybe we have no idea how to get there right now, but can we at least agree on that's where we want to go? And conversely, if people don't have a shared vision, you're not really going to get there. It's going to be hard to even move in that direction. So this seems to be a key component of any change, having an appealing vision to move towards. And of course, in motive, why would we want to go there? So think of these as different things. You can't just paint this picture of like, oh, look at Agile. This is our destination. It needs to be like, well, what's the point? What would be gained by being there? Why would that feel good, for example? So both these are important, but not enough. There also needs to be an understanding of where are we right now. Because if people have a completely different picture of how things work right now, people won't be moving in the same direction, right? Like using the map metaphor, if we all think we're in different places, we won't move together. Maybe some people think we already are here, right? The manager's like, let's say we want to ship more often. And the manager's like, well, we already ship every week now. And the team's like, no, we ship bug fixes to our horrible products. We ship releases once every year. And then we just have different understanding of how it works right now. And then it'll be hard to make change. So a shared view of where we want to go, why we want to go there, where are we right now. But that's also not enough. There also needs to be some feeling of hope, because if there's a too big gap from here to here, and then it'll be like, yeah, that would be nice. It'd be nice to go there, but there's no way in hell we can do that. So then we just get stuck. So there needs to be some sense of, well, what can we do now that'll get us one step closer? Maybe we, if we ship every year, maybe we can ship twice per year, right? Something, one step in the right direction. Maybe we can't make fully cross-functional teams, but can we at least put the testers and developers in the same room? Something along the way. And this could be enough to start a journey, but not enough to sustain it. There needs to be some sense of like, are we doing better now than before? Where are we now compared to before? So I think of these as, this is a very abstract, high-level model, but I hope it feels somewhat familiar, because any change model will basically be, some variant of this. When there's resistance to change, I can often connect it to one of these. People don't want to change because they don't see the point, or they don't understand the destination, or they don't agree on where we are now, or they don't see any way to get started, or they don't see they don't get any sense of progress. So it kind of fizzles out after a while. Any of these could be sources of a valid resistance. So back to Spotify, what I find is that, what I think is happening is that this model here, with all these companies faced with existential crisis, it fulfills, it provides this. It provides like an inspiring destination. Like, oh, that would be a nice place to be at. And also a motive, because a lot of what I talk about here is the why. Why are we doing this? Like, what's the point? It's kind of, included in all this material. And since this is quite, split up into lots of specific things, we could do decoupled releases. Maybe start there. Maybe we start with release trains, or maybe we start with, adding a community of interest, like a matrix-like thing. You could pick any part of this, and that could be your first step on a journey, right? And then maybe you change it. Maybe you start with release trains and feature toggles, and you do something differently. So this model provides also a next steps. It doesn't provide so much of these, I would say, but this is a pretty good start, right? So I don't know. Maybe this is also one of the reasons that it just gave, it helped companies start their journey a little bit. Okay, but yeah, let's hop forward a little bit. I've already talked a bit about what it tells us about the world, right? The world is ripe for change, and case studies are helpful. Should companies copy the model? Oh wait, let me lock that again. Sorry about that. There we go. Locked. All right. I don't need to worry about pulling it by accident. Should companies copy the model? As I mentioned, copy, paste, adapt. I'm going to add that, in fact, myself here, because I don't want that to be lost. Copy, paste, and adapt. The reason why I emphasize that is because this is maybe where my opinion differs a little bit. I hear a lot of people complain about copy, paste and say, don't copy, paste other companies. Well, my opinion is different. I say, do copy, paste other companies, but make sure you also adapt. I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel over and over again. But ideally copy from multiple companies, not just one. So what does this all have to do with leading complexity? I think I already mentioned that as well, right? We are in this complex world, and as leaders, we need to deal with that. And this model is one approach to help with that. But it also tells us there are some principles in there that are helpful. And you don't need to, think of it as we are using the Spotify model. It's more like we're applying some of the similar principles. Because again, we did not invent these principles, most of them. All right. So I'm going to talk, I'm not going to go through the whole model because you already have the videos, but I'm going to emphasize a few things that I think are maybe extra relevant to the context of leading complexity, or maybe because some important messages sometimes get lost in the hype, right? There's a lot of stuff in here, and it's easy to get lost in details. So let me look up my notes here. Some things worth emphasizing. There's a picture I don't even have here, I think. So I put it separate. I put it down here. I like to emphasize just in general as kind of, to me, the core of Agile in any context is really minimizing the distance between the people making the thing and the people using the thing. I think that was kind of one of the cores here at Spotify, but also in general, in all the companies I worked with, this is where I find you get the leverage. So in one way or another, reduce the distance. The distance can be in the form of handoffs, like, me as a developer or designer, I have to talk to my team lead, who has to talk to a project manager, who has to talk to a customer representative, who has to talk to blah, 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 who has to talk to blah, blah. And then somewhere in way far away, there's a, oh, sorry, I'm here, I'm the developer, right? So somewhere way down the line, there's a user. And I have no idea who it is, and I'm getting all the information filtered through 5 people. We want to get away from that, right? Direct communication. I worked now for 4 years at Mojang, doing Minecraft development, working as a gameplay designer. And it was so wonderful. I could immediately talk to the players via Twitter, via social media, immediately get feedback on the designs I was working on. And that's, I think, a core success factor for Minecraft in that game, was the fact that as developers, we are allowed to, enabled to, and encouraged to talk directly to our users on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, minimize the gap is super important, especially in a scaling context. And also minimize the gap in time, right? If I'm talking to my user about something that I shipped a year ago, it's better if I can talk to them right when I'm working on it or right after. So that's one principle that it is kind of, mentioned in here, but not explicitly, I think. So I want to call that out. Another thing I want to call out as kind of an important thing that should stand out here is really the notion of team of teams. Right? And again, that's not a term that I made up, right? It's a pretty well-established concept, but I want to highlight it. It's so important because it's not described very well in Agile frameworks. SAFe describes it, but then they add too much process on top of it, right? So the concept is really useful. I like the metaphor of a band. So think of it as each team here is a musician in a band, right? With bass player, keyboard player, right, guitarist, singer, etc., drummer. Each player is doing their own thing. No one is telling the drummer exactly what to play. The drummer decides for himself. So every person is doing their own thing. They're an expert on their instrument, but they're listening to the whole song. They're not just listening to their own part. Because if they don't listen to the whole song and everyone else, it sounds like crap, no matter how well you play. And I think that's a really useful metaphor. So all these teams are doing their own thing. They have their own aspect of this product, but they are like aligned. They are aligned on a higher level goal. For example, at Spotify, I showed a picture over here. This was when Daniel was talking about like, hey guys, we need to be, Spotify is a great product for sharing music and finding music, but it's a useless product for discovering new music. And that's the problem we need to solve. And that became like, but he didn't tell us how to solve it. He just emphasized why it's important to solve. And this is a really important kind of leadership approach that I find him to be really good at. And what happens then is all these teams get fired up. Nobody's told them what exactly to do, but they know they need to solve this problem. So different teams may be working on different aspects of the problem, maybe even exploring different solutions, maybe even competing solutions. But they're all trying to solve this high-level problem of how the hell do we make Spotify a good platform for discovering new music? And it took a while, but sometime around here, they nailed it. Discover Weekly was that's when they started nailing it. And now it's an awesome platform for discovering new music. But it took a while. And it would not have happened if the teams weren't empowered to do this. But it also wouldn't have happened if the teams didn't collaborate. So as you scale, it's very easy to get these bunch of silos, right? All these teams are doing their own thing and they're being super autonomous, but they're just crashing on each other. They're not aligned and they're like, conflicting and dependencies and problems. So yeah, I want to highlight this. But I also want to highlight this. This is a bit of a pitfall. I wish I didn't quite phrase it this way. See, Spotify was very, good at autonomy in a sense, but also kind of went overboard. So the idea was that every team chooses their own tools, chooses their own way of working, chooses their own everything. Fundamentally, I think that's a pretty good approach because it's kind of like making a trade-off. It's saying that we accept some waste, right? These two teams aren't using the exact same tools. So we're not standardizing on exactly what tool or even what process to use. Maybe they have a Scrum board that looks different from this team. And maybe this team is doing Kanban. And they just aren't doing the same thing. So by not standardizing, we allow innovation. We allow teams to find effective ways of working. And maybe this team finds a really cool tool or some really cool way of working. And then other teams get inspired by it. So you get this kind of cross-pollination that I think I talked about with the bees over here. That's magic. It's great. But don't go overboard. So for example, we had this really dumb problem for quite a long time where we weren't even using the same version control system. It was really dumb. We should all use the same version control system. So some minimum level of standardization is a good idea, but it's just that in a context where you want teams to be innovative, and learn fast, and then just standardize as little as possible. Just be very careful about it, right? But yeah, teams of teams is one thing I want to highlight. And there's a couple more, I think. Oh yeah, experiment like crazy with everything. Take nothing for granted. That, I hope, is an underlying message that comes out here. I'm not sure, but if it isn't, I want to emphasize it now, that this is the result of experimentation. Both experimenting in the product itself, via things like A/B testing, but also just in general, like how do we work effectively? There is no, like, we're never done with process. We can never say, now we know how to work, now we're done. It's always like, okay, what's working well now? What's the next thing that we want to improve? The final thing I want to highlight, which I didn't mention here so much, is about leadership attitude. And I found a really useful metaphor, which I'm not sure who I stole it from. But I stole it from somebody, so I'm sorry for not remembering who you were. But this is a four-way crossing with traffic signals, right? And this is a roundabout. So if I'm a car here and I come driving here and I want to go through this crossing, and the light is red, then I have to stop, right? That's the rule. This light decides who gets to drive and who has to stop. So it's like a centralized control system. You obey the traffic lights. This system is different, right? This is based on trust, transparency, and self-organization. There are no exact rules. Okay, whoever's in the roundabout has right of way, but there's often no exact line. Like, when exactly is this car considered to be, in front of me or not? And there's all kinds of weird edge cases here. So there's no exact rule. The rule is look around, right? And follow these principles. And then there is a shared goal, right? There's a shared goal of everyone wants everyone to get through the roundabout without crashing. That's a shared collaborative goal. Because if you crash, then you're going to block me. So I don't want you to crash, and you don't want me to crash. We all want everybody to go through here as quickly and smoothly as possible. What's interesting is looking at the research for these roundabouts, it's really interesting. I have some sources here, but there's other research too, and they kind of generally come to the same conclusion that these roundabouts are, for the most part, better. There's a lot less accidents, especially fatal accidents, 90% reduction. Faster flow, because you don't have to stop unless you really need to stop. Lower cost to build them, and you don't need this system, the traffic lights. And I should lock that as well. Yes, thank you for reminding me. Interestingly enough, less space. The roundabout itself takes more space, but because the roundabout causes faster flow throughout the whole traffic system, the roads leading into the roundabout can be smaller. So from a holistic perspective, it also causes your traffic system to take less space. So for the most part, these are better. There are some cases where this crossing is better. For example, if the speed limits are very different, if this is like a highway and this is a small road, then traffic lights or something else is better. So there are some cases, but in general, this is a better model. And I think this is a good metaphor for leadership in a complex environment. A good leader or a bad leader in a complex environment is trying to be the traffic light, right? Is sitting there trying to control things like, oh my God, there's so many moving parts. You stop, you do this, they're trying to stand in the middle, controlling things. And it gives you this illusion of control. But what you're actually doing is causing slower flow and more accidents in your organization, right? It's a metaphor, but a pretty relevant metaphor. Instead, you shouldn't be the traffic light. You should be the designer of the roundabout. So you design the roundabout, and then you stand over here, observing it. You're not here trying to direct traffic. You're standing on the side, watching. And then you notice that, oh my God, the cars coming here, they often have to wait for a really long time. So maybe you talk to some of those people and you maybe tweak the roundabout a little bit. Tweak the layout of it, or tweak the rules of the roundabout or something, and then you observe again. That's a really useful mindset, and that's what I found at most companies I worked at that are good at dealing with complexity. That is the mindset they have. They don't stand in the middle directing traffic. They create the system and then observe it. So it's a high level metaphor, but I find it really useful. So I think that's. Let me just quickly look at my notes, see if I missed something important. But I think those were the main things that were in my head. Just give me a moment. Yeah, one reflection also, by the way, speaking of these frameworks. I've met quite a few companies that when I ask, like, why are you using this this thing we call the Spotify model. Like what drove you to that? And some of them are saying because this, we don't want to do safe. They'd basically be like, we need something, and this framework is too heavyweight. Or we tried safe, and it just was too much. We need something more lightweight. So I'm not going to say safe doesn't work. We actually did use it at Lego, and it did help us for a while, although we stopped after a while. But I think it's an interesting contrast. I think they're just kind of opposites. Spotify gives you all these principles, but not a whole lot of specific details for how to do it. Safe is the opposite. It gives you the principles, and they're good, but it gives you all the answers to all the questions you can ever imagine. And if you apply all that, you get this incredibly heavyweight process. So the idea in safe is don't apply everything in there, then you may be okay. But it's very tempting to fall into this trap of applying everything, and then it becomes very heavyweight. So it seems like for some companies, they see this just as another approach to scaling. Although if you look behind all the detailed practices in safe, you'll find that the principles are very similar. Team of teams is a very central concept in safe, for example. But okay, I'm going to quickly check my notes if there was any other things. Yeah, no, I think that was pretty much what I had on my chest. So let's pop over here a little bit. And first, let's just see if there are any interesting more insights here. Steal with pride. Exactly. Roundabout, like that one. Cool. Describe the problem, motivate, why solve it. Yes, let the team find a solution. Again, feel free to add any other insights, even stuff that I didn't talk about. You can also mark, if there's things that you agree with here, you could also use this nice feature in Miro where you go like, left click there and there's a little face there. You can go like thumb up. And anyone else also agree with that can just click on that. And, it just could be interesting to see, like, if we get a bunch of notes here, just see how do you, which ones are most relevant to you, right? Oh, thanks for the link here to liberating structures. That's cool. Anyway, cool. There's a bunch of questions here. So the way I'm going to do this is, actually, let's just silently read them for a moment. I'll just shut up for a minute here. There's a lot of things I haven't really heard of. Unfixed model. There's a link. Oh, let's unfix the Spotify model. Wait, maybe I have read that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna start by picking questions that where I feel that I have something useful to say. But in parallel, feel free to put thumbs up on the questions that you think are most interesting. So I'll try to use that as well to guide the prioritization, all right? So I'll pick a few quick ones. This one is interesting. Impact of Spotify model hiring processes. Hiring was not at all in my mind when I made the video. And it wasn't really in our mind either when me and Anders wrote the article. We were just trying to share what we were doing. But it had a profound impact on hiring, which was surprising and positive. Because like basically the HR department were like cheering. Like, this is magic, right? All these people are looking at this video and going, oh, this is so cool, I want to work there. And then they would show up. And it also became self-selection. Some people get turned off by it. Some people think this sounds horrible and scary. And then that's great. Self-selection. They're not going to want to apply to Spotify, right? We save some time. So it was good for a while. After a while, it started getting a little bit problematic because as the years passed, this became a less and less accurate representation of how we actually work. So people would come in with all these expectations and they're like, wait a sec. This tribe doesn't even have squads. Yeah, no, we don't. We stopped doing that a couple of years ago. But wait, and then they'd be like, wait a sec. So now I'm not sure, but I know that there was talk about taking the videos down, but then they decided to keep them up because it kind of was like this is a historically relevant thing, and a lot of companies are inspired by this. So why would we take that away? We just need to keep emphasizing that this is not a living document. This was just a snapshot of how we worked at the time. So pretty much everyone I know that has worked with this at Spotify, we tend to all be repeating that same thing, right? But yeah, it had a big impact on hiring, a big positive impact. Later on, maybe not as positive impact because it could be a bit misleading as well. I think maybe Spotify would benefit from maybe someone making a new version of this, a shorter one, maybe just saying that here are some guiding principles. Maybe they already have it. I don't know. Maybe the hiring site has something like that. I don't know. If someone's at Spotify now, feel free to chime in and speak to the hiring thing now if you want. That's fine. But yeah, in the meantime, I will pick another note. Let's see. How can you make leaders understand? You take them and you bang their head against the wall. No. How can you make leaders understand that they can't copy or buy a model? Okay. So you can't make people understand anything, I think, in general. But you can inspire people, provide examples, and do coaching. I know it's a very wishy-washy, hand-wavy answer, but it's all I can come up with. I don't know how to make people do anything. Noticing when it happens is a good thing, though. If you see a leader just taking it wholesale and they seem to be expecting it to just work, there's a coaching moment. So grab that coaching moment. That's maybe an idea. But if anyone else has any thoughts on that, feel free to either just speak up or maybe add a little note below it here, or add a comment, or just add your 2 cents. This is a bit, all right, these two are a little bit related, I guess. This one I think is a bit related. Do you think we really need a model at all? What's the lure with models to keep us wanting one? Well, I think the whole Spotify story proves that we do need models. I don't think it's up to me to decide there. I can say personally that I've had a lot of use from models as well. When I was trying to apply, like when I started my career as a developer and later on became an entrepreneur and a manager in a company, I needed a way to work. And I wasn't skilled enough to invent a process. I just knew what didn't work because I'd seen plenty of failed waterfall projects. So I knew how not to work. I didn't know what would work better. And then I stumbled over the first wiki, the C2 or the C3 wiki, I forget, the one where all the Agile folks were hanging out before Agile was Agile. And they were talking about pair programming and teams and self-organization and, you know, frequent releases, test automation, all these things that later on became Agile. It was amazing. That was my equivalent of the Spotify model. Like I saw that and was like, oh my God, this is so inspiring. And I applied it and it was really helpful. So I needed that model. And later on, when I've been, you know, helping companies apply Scrum and other Agile methods, putting something out there like Scrum, which is a model, it's a framework, it is in a sense a model, it helps people. It gives you a starting point. It says, let's start from this instead of starting from scratch. So yeah, that's, I guess my 2 cents is, yeah, models are good. Just be careful. Safe is too big, in my opinion. Models shouldn't be that big. It becomes a problem. And I guess this is related. Should orgs always make their version of models? Wait, what does it say? Should orgs always make their own version of models they adopt? Are there downsides, risks? That's really interesting because there's always a risk with making change in general, right? If you're taking the way you already work now is optimized for the results you're getting now. Oh, thanks for that link. Yes, that was it's still up there. This super inspiring. This is the roots of Agile right there on that site. It's still there. So cool. Anyway, yeah, changing, like your current process is perfectly optimized for the results you're getting today, right? So changing it means you're going to get different results. And the question is, do you want that, right? If you're happy with the current results, maybe not. But if you're not happy with current results, making a change is maybe the right thing. But it's a risk, of course. And applying another company's model wholesale is a risk. But inventing your own model is also a risk. Everything is a risk. And guess what? Not changing anything is also a risk, right? So I think it's just kind of like, yeah, we live in a world of risk. Deal with it, right? Pick your pain. And I think it kind of boils down to what's worse, the risk of not changing anything versus the risk of changing things. And in general, I find that the risk of not changing is worse. Because if you make a change, it'll either work out really nicely, and then that's a win, right? Or it didn't work out nicely, and then you learn something, and you can change again. So in general, I find that there's so much more to win by making changes and tweaking things than to kind of take the safe route and not change or just apply another model. I hope I'm interpreting these questions correctly. And again, if anyone wants to pitch in about anything at all, feel free. The organized section of this talk is over. This is just, yeah, general chat. But this one has a bunch of thumbs. Let's talk about it. Lots have changed since this model came out. How would you do it now, especially with distributed teams in a remote working era? Is there a new model coming out? Okay, fun story. A couple of years after the video came out and kind of Spotify model became this hyped thing, people in Spotify were a little bit mystified about it. Daniel Ek, the founder and CEO, wandered by my desk, and we talked a bit about, you know, what was going on in the world. He was kind of mystified by what everyone's talking about the Spotify model, but we're always changing our approach. So it's interesting how people are copying the way we used to work. And we also talked about how it was interesting how some companies were copying a little bit too much and just expecting things to just work. So he suggested that I make a spoof. He's like, can you make a spoof video? Like a Spotify engineering culture version, you know, part 3. Right? This is a 2-part video. And it would be a bogus one. And we would make up all this stuff like, well, at Spotify, we believe in servant leadership. Therefore, at every daily meeting, Daniel Ek comes by and serves cake to all the teams. And he would come and serve cake because we want him to be a servant, right? And we believe that, you know, physical activity is a good thing. So all daily scrums are done standing on your head because then you get the blood coming down into your head and you're smarter. So we'd have pictures of teams doing their daily scrum on their head. And you know, it's like, let's make this video and then just see if people copy it and buy it. Unfortunately, none of us really felt that we had the time. It takes quite a long time doing these things, so we never got around to it. But if I could go back in time, I probably would have wanted to do it because it would have been hilarious to see what happened. But yeah, what would I do differently? Well, first of all, one major big aha, thanks to COVID, which I think is an aha that many people have, is that Agile was based on co-location. It was a key concept in Agile. Co-located teams are the best thing, right? Well, like at Spotify was all about co-located teams. Working with the Minecraft development was also all about co-located teams, and it was amazing. But then COVID came along, and suddenly we're all at home going, oh shit, now what? Luckily, we took a picture of all of our boards on the wall, and within a couple of days, we had put everything on Miro. So using this wonderful tool here, we just put everything on the board, and then we did the same thing we did. It's just that we had Teams calls, and we had all our boards on Miro instead. And to our big surprise, it worked better than we would have expected. In some cases, even better than being in the same room. For example, we had these big things we called the dashboard review, when a bunch of different teams working on different aspects of the game, Minecraft, would gather around this physical board, talking about like, okay, what's up? Who's doing what? It was basically our version of this, right? A bunch of teams doing their own thing, but trying to align. So every week we had this kind of high-level equivalent of a scrum of scrums. And it was a physical board, right? We're all standing around it, talking about who's doing what and which team is blocked and who needs help from who, where we have dependencies, etc. Really useful. But then suddenly we're all sitting at home on a video call like we're doing right now, and you know, looking at a board like we're doing right now. And it was kind of cool because anyone can see the whole board. Anyone can zoom in. Anyone can add a sticky note without physically blocking the view for other people. We don't need to worry about horrible handwriting. We don't need to worry about photographing the board and putting it on a Slack so people in other places can see it. We don't need to worry about backups. There's just all these things where we're like, oh my God, this was actually better in some ways, but also worse in some ways. We would miss the informal conversations happening after the meeting, standing around it. We would miss people walking by the board at random on their way to the coffee machine, looking at it and reflecting on something they saw on it. So we would lose a lot. But in general, I think my big insight has been that fully co-located is magic. Fully distributed can be almost equivalent. The problem though is culture rot. And that's what I've been seeing, and many other people are seeing too. It's that over time the culture gradually gets damaged, it seems, because we're not in the same place. We're not having lunch together. We're not having these informal chats. It's possible to create that digitally as well, but it seems hard. Like we have these, digital fika, like many companies, like, hey, 3 p.m. Fridays, we have a digital fika. There's a Teams call here. You can just join. But guess what? Everyone is tired of Teams calls. and just wants to work now. They don't want to go to yet another Teams call and just stare at each other awkwardly talking about what you're going to do this weekend. Some people like that, but most people didn't. So it was really hard to mimic this very informal, like, hey, I just happened to walk by your desk and happen to see what you're working on. And hey, I have a question about that. That kind of just disappeared. So that's hard. It's possible to mitigate that a little bit in some ways, but really hard. So in general, yeah, I would probably, if going back, I would have been less picky about, saying we have to be co-located, saying we can be distributed as well. That's fine. But we need to meet sometimes, right? If nothing else, just socially or doing workshops. However, the big mystery, and this is an unsolved mystery in my head, is how the hell do you do hybrid? Like we've been trying that at Mojang, and I've been seeing other companies trying it. It just seems worse because it seems like, if we're fully co-located, we're in the same physical room. If we're fully distributed, we're in the same digital room. Whenever we're interacting, we're in the same digital room. Just like right now, we are in the same digital room. We can see each other somewhat. We have a board here. We can do stuff together. We're kind of in the same room. But if some of us, if I had 5 people here in the room with me, and then we have you here on the screen, that gets weird, right? Some people are here, some people are there, and we're not in the same room. That's really hard. We'll probably figure it out, but it seems like we haven't figured it out yet. But yeah, so in answer to the question, I would probably be less anal about we have to be physically co-located. That's probably one thing. I would probably also earlier look into standardizing some things. Like, like I said, we shouldn't use different version control systems, for example. So looking into a little more of that. What else? Yeah, I don't know. Anyone else who was or is at Spotify want to chime in on stuff we might have done differently? And that's interesting to hear. If not, I'll just keep looking at notes with lots of thumbs. Oh yeah, how did teams manage the competing with other teams while attempting to solve the same problem? This is a really interesting question. I like to emphasize that a lot of my former Spotify colleagues like to also emphasize the importance of sense of urgency. There was this feeling of like, we are in a startup. We are doing a crazy thing here. We are doing everything that the music industry experts said was impossible. People are saying that you cannot compete against these big companies. People are saying that people want to own their own music. Streaming won't work, or it will be technically impossible to create a good streaming experience because of lag. There are all these reasons why Spotify cannot succeed. So we had all these people who were at Spotify because they wanted to prove them wrong, right? They wanted to say, we can do this. So this very strong sense of pride and shared mission and sense of urgency, I felt that to be somewhat unique to Spotify. I've seen it in some other cases. Mojang, I saw it there as well. But it seems quite rare to have this true sense of urgency kind of at all levels. And that helped a lot because that meant that when teams were working on things that might seem competing, right? Maybe they're working on different ways of implementing the same feature because we're going to A/B test this. We want to try both, right? Or maybe team B is trying to implement a better version of something that team A built last year. I'm sure there were some, people are people, right? Jealousy, all these things were there, but not at all visible to the same extent I've seen in other companies. It was a lot more like, if team B builds a better version of what this team built last year, I would more often hear them cheering together and, celebrating that. Yeah, look, the product got better. We are now more likely to have a company next year and not have to shut down the company and give up. So there's a sense of like, we want to succeed, and whether we use your thing or my thing, just use whatever worked best because that makes the product work and it makes us feel proud and it makes the company stay around so I can stay here, kind of thing. I don't know if that's still the case. As the company got bigger and bigger, it got harder to maintain that sense of, it became more like a normal company, kind of, especially when we went public. But what I saw when I was there was very much this very mission-driven approach, which kind of counteracted what might have otherwise been seen as competition. But I think management attitude, again, was very important. That teams were never, from what I could see, punished or, yelled at for throwing stuff away, right? They could try something, ship it, and then think, you know what, this didn't work as well as we thought. Let's make something better and throw the old thing away. That wasn't considered waste. That was like celebrated. That's great. We found something better. the managers were always emphasizing that we have to try, we have to always improve. We can't take stuff for granted. We can't fall into sunk cost fallacy. And that kind of leadership attitude, I think, helped permeate this culture. Yeah, again, big disclaimer. Everything I'm talking about is just my own personal kind of reflection here. So I'm not trying to represent like the company. Just observations, what I saw. Okay, let's see. What else do we have here? Ways of working. What approach do you recommend organizations use to experiment and share ways of working? So what I kind of like about approaches like Scrum, and anything based on Scrum, SAFe is based on Scrum, for example. The Spotify approach is based very much on Scrum, although we didn't strictly standardize on Scrum. Most teams did Scrum. Scrum has a built-in improvement engine, and I think that's part of the success factor of the model. Retrospectives, right? We reserve time for it. We do it every sprint, and quite often, even more often. Like we do it every sprint and after a big release, and when starting up a new team, or there's just all kinds of situations where the framework itself kind of emphasizes the need for continuous improvement, and not only at retros, but even on a daily basis, right? The daily Scrum formula is what did I work on since last meeting? What am I working on now, today? And what's in my way? And as part of that, teams are encouraged to help each other get unblocked. So every daily Scrum or daily stand-up is a mini retro. So I would say, just using an agile approach such as Scrum and doing it kind of as intended, maybe even by the book initially, is going to be helpful. Just make sure the book isn't treated as gospel, right? Then start changing things. But when changing things, please don't remove retros, right? Keep that bit, because that's the bit that helps you improve everything else. But at a higher level, I would really say that try to spread a culture of it's okay to get it wrong, right? We're going to make changes, and there's sometimes going to be bad changes. We don't need to know that it's going to work before trying things. It's just that we're going to make a lot of changes. So if we try something that didn't work well, we'll just try something else, right? So this kind of try to create this safe space where we don't have to figure everything else out in advance, and especially try to get out of the big bang mindset. It's not like this year is going to be the big change program, right? It's more like we're gonna become a company of continuous improvement, and therefore change is going to be constant. Of course, we also need to get work done, right? So the nice thing about Scrum is that we have retros, but then we also have not retros, which is actually doing the work. So make sure we're not always just talking about improvement, but reserve time for improvement, create a culture of it's okay to make mistakes and try stuff that didn't work. That's really all I can think of. And frameworks like Scrum and even SAFe, as long as you don't do all of it, they actually do help in that sense, because they create space in people's calendars and expect people to take time to talk about improvement. I can add one more thing. I kind of like the Toyota kata. I don't like following it rigidly. I mentioned it in the Spotify video somewhere here. The Toyota improvement kata. You can also look it up, Google it, or if someone wants to add a link, that's fine. But you don't need to follow it rigidly. It basically is, this again is really the same thing. It's just a structured approach to improvement, saying that okay, we want to improve the quality of our architecture. Great. What's our destination? What's our motive? What's the current location? What's the next step? What's progress meter? Or in using Toyota kata terminology, it's the vision, current state, next steps, next target. It's the same thing using different words, really. So those kind of improvement frameworks are really useful. Again, just be careful. You don't necessarily need to do it exactly as Toyota does it, because then you're gonna have to read 2 books, attend a certification course, bring in a coach, and it becomes this really huge thing that you might not need. So we have 2 minutes left, and I'm tired of talking. So someone else say something.
Fantastic talk, Henrik. So much insights related to the Spotify model and what that means, etc. So it would be interesting. Michael, Jenny, Thomas, do you have a question?
Or an insight?
Yeah, what was the biggest insight to the crew?
I really like the kind of speed of innovation that this Spotify didn't really have any other advantage compared to competitors. So it was just speed of innovation and continuously just improving. And Spotify model wouldn't have worked if it was this kind of same today. So, and I think we'll have similar more of that next session as well about speed of innovation.
Yes, very important. I also like to highlight this Toyota Kata idea, having a clear definition of awesome. I think I heard that first time when you talked about it from Spotify. I mean, I think that is really awesome. Being clear where we are heading and then collaborating to get there.
How about you, Jenny? What was your key?
Oh, I have many, but the thing that sticks really closely to me is the experiment, whatever you try. Like experiment everywhere, you said, both what you do and how you do it. And then also I want to question about the roundabouts, because I know that there are some people in roundabouts that really do want to be directive, and they are really angry with people that are not using their blinkers. Maybe you do have some sort of, I don't know, something to deal with there as well.
By the way, funny story there. From what I heard, when they introduced roundabouts in France, or at least some parts of France, they kept the högerregel. So whoever's, you know, whoever is on the right side has the right of way, which is, you know, useful in a crossing without traffic lights. But in a roundabout, like, that means that people coming in have the right of way. So roundabouts became death traps. You got stuck there, you couldn't get out, and it became this traffic chaos. And they realized maybe we should change that so that doesn't apply in roundabouts, and they changed it. Kind of funny.
That was a key insight for me. So the roundabouts, empowering teams, thinking differently as leaders. So let's continue the conversation on Slack. So we're going to paste a link to Slack. If you have further questions, post them, and then everybody else chime in on taking this discussion further. So fantastic talk, Henrik, so much insight, and thank you all for joining. How many people were we? 170, something like that, right?
You got a bunch.
166 at the most.
Yeah, so almost everyone showed up. So thank you to everyone. Thank you to the organizers, and a special thank you to Henrik for such an interactive talk and inspiring talk.
Cool.
So see you next week,
if anyone wants to add any more insights here, I'll leave this editable until tomorrow, and then I'll put it read-only so it doesn't start accumulating, you know, entropy over many years. But if you want to add any other insights here, feel free. And this document is basically the, you know, we'll distribute, I guess, a PDF version of this. Plus, it'll stay here, I guess, for a while at least. So yeah, thanks for helping to add stuff to the presentation. That's really useful.
Great, and see you next week, Thursday, 7 p.m. Central European
Yes, to be
time.
continued.
Joe Justice, sharing his insights from Tesla.
Thanks
See
very
you
much.
then.
Until
If
next
you
time.
want to unmute and say goodbye, then please do so. It's nice to hear voices as well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.